Welcome back to the Medicine Podcast. This is Mimi, and I'm sitting next to my love, Chase. And we are kicking off part one of a very special group of episodes for the next 4 episodes. This is a very fun astrology series with one of our best friends in the world, Adrienne Abeyta, who's been on the show multiple times, I think 5 or 6 times now.
Most decorated.
Yeah.
With the medicine
Yes.
episode guest appearances, Adrienne Abeyta. She's going to be on 4 in a row, so now she's at like 10.
Yeah, exactly. But we just wanted to provide a little bit of an intro, as this is, a different type of episode series that we're doing. And we really wanted to just go back to the roots of astrology and provide our listeners with basically a 101 for astrology and looking at each of the individual zodiac signs. So that's what we do with Adrienne in these next 4 episodes.
Yeah, totally. This was something that we've received a lot of feedback in prior episodes around astrology with hey, can you guys walk us through from your lens, from Adrienne's lens, the signs of the zodiac? Because we're in a world that's swimming with pretty much any option that you can think of as it pertains to understanding astrology. There is pop spirituality, pop psychology, pop astrology, everywhere you go. And we really wanted to come back to not only the basics, but from a really foundational level that's deeply rooted in ancient wisdom that Adrienne so beautifully has studied and can regurgitate in a way that's very bite-sized, very applicable to one's life. And we are actually in Greece right now. If you're listening to this, we're spending the entire month in the Mediterranean between Greece and Italy. And it was the perfect time to say, we want to do an astrology series. Let's pre-record 6 hours worth of incredible content and release it over the month of May. And so if this is the first time that you're listening to the Medicine Podcast, we've had Adrienne on many, many times. But this will be a great introduction to the way that we think, the way that we walk through ideas like astrology, try to take things that seem esoteric, metabolize them into something that's a little more digestible for the everyday person. And this was just such a fun, we did this over the course of a day, but it felt like, a decade's worth of information.
Yeah. And even if you know something about astrology, Chase and I are not complete novices. We're still very much beginners, I would say, but in comparison to Adrienne, who is a professional, she does this professionally for her work in the world. And even if you know something about astrology, I guarantee you, listening to Adrienne, she's been a professional for 20 years, you will learn something. And it's not just, okay, let's talk about the signs, but also how do we bring this knowledge into our life such that it becomes wisdom with how we navigate our own relationships and our own mission and purpose in the world, and just being able to understand ourselves and our loved ones from a different perspective, from a cosmic perspective. And Adrienne is just so gifted in this area, being able to speak to these different archetypes. And no matter where you're at, whether you're a total novice or whether you're a professional yourself, you definitely will learn something from Adrienne.
If you're 0% into esoteric ideas, if you're 0% woo, this is still for you. That was the point of this conversation. I have found it very applicable in my professional life to understand the signs, because what the signs are is if you want to, try to reframe this in a very practical, modern way. It's like the personality tests that we're all looking for that when played correctly support us in life so that we don't feel like we are as upstream as we were prior. It helps us gauge where the wind is blowing and lean into that with our sails, if you will. And we intro Adrienne again on the show, but just for context for everybody, she has many, many, many years of working in the systems of numerology, astrology, tarot drawing, and not just that, but she is a master on the principles of mysticism, Buddhism, contemporary psychology. She has a degree in religious studies. She's a certified life coach, and she has a history specializing in addiction and recovery, spiritual counseling. and really, really rooted in psychology, to where she makes this beautiful blend of like the masculine and the feminine as it pertains to therapy, teaching, and healing at large.
Yeah. So you're right where you need to be. Episode 1, part 1 of this 4-part series. If you are interested in reaching out to Adrienne for a professional reading, of course, we will have all of her contact information in the show notes. You can look her up on Instagram, Adrienne Soul Sessions, or you can literally just Google her name, Adrienne Abeyta. We'll have all of that information in the show notes. We hope you guys love this series. If you do, share it on your story, share it with someone you love. Let us know, tag us on Instagram. We love to see it.
And lastly, if you want to see what we're up to, follow us on Instagram. We should be posting a lot on our Greece journey. And let us know if you love the episode.
Yep. Cheers. Enjoy. All right. We're sitting here with our beautiful fairy godmother, and we just pulled the Hierophant. We always love to ask you to pull a card for us as we sit down and enter into the podcast portal.
Yes.
So tell us about the Hierophant and the significance of pulling that card, and then the other if you like.
Okay. So I think it's perfect for today. The Hierophant is the 5th card in the Major Arcana, and it represents the teacher. It was referred to as the Pope. The Hierophant is that of higher knowledge and wisdom. For us today, that's exactly what we're doing. We are, discussing philosophy and our systems of belief and how we form meaning in our life based upon what we believe. And astrology is such a hot topic in terms of, how people understand it. First of all, it's not a belief system. And so I always think that that's very interesting when people come in and they're like, oh, I don't really believe in astrology. And I'm like, you don't really need to believe in astrology. It believes in you.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think how we talk about astrology, though, is really how we give it life. And so that's what I think this Hierophant is here, is for us all to have open minds in understanding that this ancient wisdom is merely one path to the top of the mountain. And at the top of the mountain is God or the divine.
Yeah. I noticed on the card there, the Hierophant has its right hand in the air and its left holding a staff. I would imagine that is the balance between the skies and the heavens, and keeping one foot on the ground, at least in the grounded 3D reality.
So good. And how that connects to this big topic, right, of the stars, and the stars being that in heaven, and then us, these material forms of the divine, and that interrelationship, that interconnection between our heavenly bodies, right, the planets and the stars, and our physical bodies, and how they are merely reflections of each other. Bam.
Love
There's
that.
also on this specific card, I don't know if it's present on every Hierophant card, but there's also 2 what looks to be priests or other spiritual students or whoever, people that are at his feet
with terrible
clearly
hairlines.
Terrible hairlines. The universe was not kind when it comes to male pattern baldness for these 2. But when I see that, I think it's a reminder for me that, or at least it's pointing to the fact that the Hierophant needs to remember that there are people listening to what he or she is saying. And that's how I would think too. Like there are people that are going to want to learn, but there will always be people listening whether you like it or not. And like be very precise with your interpretation, with your application, with your integration, because there will be people listening.
Damn, you guys are so good. Are you sure you don't want to talk tarot? I mean, there's a couple things in that too, and I thought where you were going with that, the 2 students that are sitting at the foot of the Hierophant might also be accolades, right, or followers of that. And I thought you might project yourself and Chase into that image and be prostrating at my feet.
Yes.
I was. I mean,
we
I
all
was.
are, as are the listeners.
We always are. I mean, we could, this, but we could just sit and listen to you, and we do.
Yeah, we do.
That's the wonderful thing about our job that is podcasting, is we get to learn from incredible humans like yourself and just bathe in your wisdom. So yes, that is absolutely us with better hair.
Well, they're wearing yarmulkes, I'll have you know. But
Yes. Okay.
no,
Okay.
but equally so. It's also me kneeling and bowing at the altar of life, because ultimately life is our greatest teacher, and so we all must take pause and kneel when we need to know. Right, the answers are within, but we also have to humble ourselves and remember that everything is a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
And our next
absolutely.
card, the Five of Wands, we've got 5 individuals who almost seem to be holding wands, but in a way that would be collaborative in some sense with the other 5 individuals. And what does this one mean?
I know you weren't asking me that, but before she says anything, it almost looks like there's a couple of them that are actually like fighting. It looks like a couple are fighting and a couple are trying to build or be creative. And doesn't this guy look like he's like trying to use it as a weapon? And this guy looks like he's like trying to provide some sort of structure. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm curious what
I like it. Well, I love that's what the cards are. They're such great mirrors for projection. I think, though, that what you're seeing in that, and it is a dynamic tension, there's a lot of energy here. And 5, again, this is the 5, like the Hierophant. Wands, in this case, are more our higher aspirations, our endeavors. And so here, this is a huge element of change. 5 is that element of change. And so here, what the discord and the harmony that you see are in relationship to one another. And so if we say that this card is an expression of the Hierophant, which we would do because it's a minor, we could say that, all of us, in our own attempt to try to understand the greater meaning, the purpose of life, why we're here, we do become embroiled in confrontation. Like, think about the religious warfare, right? We also do become embroiled in dance with each other as we explore differing concepts and, philosophies. But ultimately, how we collaborate, how we connect with one another under the umbrella of the great unknown is part of the mystery. It is part of the dance. And so we could see that in each of their hands, they each are bearing a staff. And maybe it's 5 different systems of belief, right? Maybe it's 5 different aspirations that they're working with, and how to create some sort of cohesion out of chaos. And so on that note, what astrology is it's order in chaos. And when we understand that we give order to chaos, we understand that we make meaning out of life. And that is both our greatest gift and offering, but it's also the great unknown, because we don't really know, right? But we sure love the systems that make us think we know.
Yeah. In this little cup, I have my favorite way to enjoy mushy love, which is in combination with cold milk. We drink raw cow's milk, and I put it about 8 ounces of milk in with about a scoop and a half of mushy love. That combination, like the cold version of mushy love, tastes like liquid graham crackers. Like, I shit you not. If you don't know yet what mushy love is, it's our mushroom elixir with 500 milligrams of chaga, which is amazing for gut support. They call it the king of mushrooms. And then 500 milligrams as well of tremella mushroom, which is the beauty mushroom. And she is most known for holding 500 times her weight in water. The more hydrated we are, the more plump and dewy and fresh and young our skin looks.
Plump and dewy.
For Mushy Love, go to getmushylove.com and you can use the code MEDICINE for a nice little discount that we only give to our medicine podcast listeners.
Beautiful. And that's a beautiful segue into just talking about what we are going to be going through in this 4-part series, everybody.
Woo-hoo!
We are
Strap in.
going to be doing a 4-part series around astrology with Adrienne Abeyta, our great teacher and friend. If you're listening to this right now, we are likely in Greece, or as at least I hope we are by now.
Yes.
And this will be one of a 4-part astrology series for the month of May. Today, we're going to be talking about the structure, some general redefining of terms. We've talked about astrology a few different times. We've had Adrienne on many times, but it's been a few years since we got into sort of the nuts and bolts of astrology. So today's like an astrology 101, laying the structure, getting a little bit deeper than we have previously, as we're a little more versed in it ourselves, but still consider ourselves beginners. And then we will open up episodes 2 and 3 to diving into the specific signs themselves, and wrap up episode 4 of this series with more of a macro view, zooming out a little bit and seeing how this plays an important role in the collective at large. And so, yeah, really excited about this, and just so grateful that you're willing to do this. And with that, I think we can get into today.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think to those who are listening, whatever you know about astrology, or whatever you've been taught, or whatever you think you know, whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or you call yourself an astrologer, our hope is that through this series, through this conversation, you will be able to use this information to apply to your own life, and then also your relationships. Because I think what the world needs more of is us just saying to ourselves, I'm willing to learn more about you. To people on the street, to people that don't think or believe the same things, religious beliefs or esoteric ideas, or whatever the thing is. What we don't need is people, pointing the finger and saying, you believe something different than me, therefore you are a threat to me. That's been a lot of history, and certainly the current climate globally. And so this is going to help us all to understand different aspects of each other in a deeper way that is not connected to choice necessarily. It's connected to the stars. It's connected to the cosmos. It's connected to archetype. Mm-hmm. And we all get a chance to dive into those deeper layers of ourselves and with each other, with our loved ones, with our children, all relationships. And astrology is an avenue that we can do that. And I think just being able to learn from someone like you, who's been doing it for how many years now?
Oh, I've been doing it since I was a child, but professionally for the last 23.
Yeah, professionally for the last 23. And I will tell you guys, if this is your first time hearing an episode with Adrienne, we have like 5 or 6 others. Just search her name in the medicine cache of episodes. We talk about a lot of different things, but this is my favorite. Astrology is my favorite. We talk about shadow. We talk about tarot, which they all have overlapping, ideas and
archetypes,
themes. Mm-hmm. But this is absolutely my favorite. And if I could just learn about astrology if I could just go to astrology school, that would be that would be ideal. But maybe someday.
Well, in these esoteric
someday soon.
systems that we often dip our toes in. So many times I have a mental exercise that feels sort of good to massage through my system. And I'm like, wow, that I think that works. That sounds nice. Mm-hmm. But something about astrology goes beyond that, and it just deeply resonates. Mm-hmm. And I have more like wow moments or aha moments as I'm studying or learning about astrology than pretty much any other system. And as much as I love tarot, there's something about astrology that has resonance, and it's such specificity, almost as if you are being seen on a level that you haven't been seen before, that makes this specifically unique. And so, maybe we open it up. Let's get into it. Let's get into the structure of astrology.
Just listening to you both wax so poetically has made me lose complete trains of thought. But in any case, yes. And I think I want to say too, Mimi, that what you were, talking about, the relationships, astrology is a system of relationships because life is a system of relationships. We can't exist without another. And so the astrology in itself is, it is this system of relationships between planets and signs and how they create an individual. And so it is that microcosmic view of understanding that our relationships, the people that we are in relationship with, also create the fabric of our own individuality, like who we are. And so I think that's an important way to start. And I also want to, just kind of hint at the last episode as well. We're going to be talking about Pluto in the sign of Aquarius, as it's just gone there, and coming back to what you just were talking about, Mimi, about collaboration. This is the big revolution. Our souls are going through, an evolution of consciousness related to the wound of belonging. And so our sense of ourself in community. So in service of that, that's how I want to lead with astrology. And I also want to honor Keith in all of this. He was my Hierophant and he was my teacher. And had it not been for him, I may not be where I am right now. And so I honor him as my first Hierophant. I love you, baby.
Sending so much love to Keith.
Yes. Well, he's here.
Yeah.
He's here for
Yeah.
sure.
All right, Keith, I'm going to do you proud.
Good.
Love it.
So let's just kind of start with, what astrology is made up of. We're going to talk about the nuts and bolts today, as we said, the structure. And so to begin, astrology is made up of the planets in our solar system. Planets and luminaries. The sun and the moon are referred to as luminaries, not technically planets, but we'll refer to them all the same. And so our birth chart, our natal chart, is made up of the sun and the moon, 3 personal planets referred to as Mercury and Venus and Mars, 2 boundary planets or social planets, which are Jupiter and Saturn, and then the outer planets are the transpersonal planets, which are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. There are specific angles in a horoscope that I'm sure most people are familiar with. The ascendant, or sometimes also referred to as the rising. That angle has an opposite, as everything does in astrology, because it's a system of relationships. And so the opposite of the ascendant is called the descendant. There's another angle at the top of a horoscope. So if you can imagine the cross, the ubiquitous cross, there are 4 cross quarters. Those 4 cross quarters are divided by equinoxes and solstices, and they start the beginning of a season. And at the start of every beginning season, there is a sign that corresponds to that. And so what I thought we could do today is kind of break the system of astrology down in the context of the seasons, since astrology is the journey of the sun.
Okay, so you mentioned the cross demarcating different seasons. Where would, if you were looking at a natal chart, where would spring be?
Okay. So spring would start on the ascendant, which if you're looking at a horoscope, look at it like a clock. And at 9 o'clock would be where the ascendant and Aries would begin. So that's the beginning of the zodiac calendar is what I want to say. Yes.
Okay. And so for the rising aspect, what significance does this have when one is trying to decipher their own chart or hear from, someone like yourself?
Well, first, in order to even know what let's refer to it as the ascendant moving forward. In order to even know what your ascendant sign is, this is where the time and the place, the time and location of birth become very important. Because at the moment of birth, that rising is what constellation is rising in the Eastern Hemisphere at the moment of birth. And so if you don't know your time of birth, then you won't know where your ascendant is, and consequently you won't know where your planets fall in the different houses in a chart. So that's first. Now, if you do know that, the ascendant represents, it's the door. If you imagine that, when you go to somebody's house, they have a door, and that door says something about them. And so it's what people see when they first meet you. We could simply say that it's the persona, or we could say that, it is the first part of the personality. Now, it's dynamic in that it is something that has been co-constructed with others. So think of it this way. When we're little kids, our teachers, our peers, other people see attributes about us and they say, oh, you're so this. You're so, Mimi, you have a Taurus. Like you might have been either, oh, you're so beautiful. You're so sweet. You're so quiet. You're so responsible. Like you would have gotten this reinforcement. And as such, we begin to embody that reinforcement because as young people, we want to be who people see us as, so we gain attention, recognition, love, and ultimately survive, right? So that ascendant becomes really important in terms of how you lead. Your sun sign is something similar to a personality, but it's not quite as personal, I'm going to say. It's more, your sun is more universal than your ascendant is. Okay. Now that ascendant sign is also ruled by a planet, as we're going to learn that each sign is ruled by a particular planet. So in the case of you, Mimi, with a Taurus rising, Venus rules your chart. Right?
Yeah, that feels accurate.
Right?
Yeah.
And, Venus is the planet of, do you know?
Of love, of relationship.
I mean, there we go, right?
Yeah.
And so that it becomes very important. The ruling planet for each person is something then that it's almost as if that's their totem. They're led with that particular energy.
Yeah.
Right. So mine is the moon. My ruling planet would be the moon. I have a Cancer rising. Yours, Chase, would be Uranus because you have an Aquarius rising. So that's one thing that, is part of the makeup of an astrology chart.
So when you just sticking with the ascending, when you identify, like I've got an Aquarius ascending, do I then go look at the attributes and traits of the Aquarius and say, oh, wow, my ego or my personality or my front door is that of the traits of the Aquarius? Or do I leverage something about the planet Uranus to understand the ascendant? How does that relationship work between the planet and the actual sign that's in my ascending?
That is a great question that we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of when we start breaking down the planets and sign.
Great.
But to answer it simply, yes. And this is why the system of astrology, first of all, is complex and complicated for others because it's layering, because it is a system of relationships. So it's like, try to imagine understanding the characteristics of Aquarius. That's, what is going to relate to you most immediately. Blend that a little bit with your sun sign, which is Gemini, which blends really well with that, with Aquarius. Then take a little dash of Uranus and recognize that, Uranus is an outer planet, so we have to have just a tiny little touch of this. It's kind of salty, but yes, it still does have bearing. Whereas for Mimi, whose planet is Venus, and that Venus is a personal planet, the sign Venus is in will also have an impact on that ascendant. So is your head expanding yet?
Yes.
So there's so many different layers.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give you a good example because I'm a good example of this. So I have a Cancer rising, which is typically very nurturing and loving and soft-spoken. And, sometimes soft-spoken unless there's an opinion. But just is caring and motherly. And yes, while people may pick that up in me, my moon, which is what rules that Cancer rising, is in the sign of Sagittarius. So now it's a fire moon. And this fire moon very much desires independence. So whereas that Cancer rising might be the caretaker at the expense of myself, my selfish Sagittarius moon helps me have boundaries and be a mother that has I'm out of business sign.
And that's so perfect because when we explain Adrienne to people who don't know her or maybe know a little bit about her, when we're singing your praises, honestly, it's like she is like your best friend that won't BS you.
Yeah.
It's not going to blow smoke up your ass. It's not going to bullshit you. She's going to give you the facts and give it to you straight because she knows that you can handle it. Or she will read into you and see what you can handle.
Yeah, she'll kick your ass, but she loves you.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the perfect ass kicking out of love. I love it.
Yeah. So that makes so much sense. Like
So it's layers and layers and layers. And as an astrologer, the art of reading astrology is really looking for the patterns because again, astrology is a system of cycles and patterns. And so when you look at a chart, you're seeing the same thing all over. It's saying the same thing over and over. Let me use another example. You have this Taurus rising ruled by Venus. You also have a moon in Libra ruled by Venus. So, and you have a moon in the 7th house, natally ruled by Libra. So we begin to build these patterns that say the same thing over and over.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
One question about the ascending. You mentioned that we may start to almost like personify or like embody. Is that necessarily a healthy thing? Is that somewhat distancing oneself from maybe their innate or most authentic self if they are, let's say, getting the feedback from others because they love your front door and you start to identify as your front door instead of the home itself? And so, for instance, certain attributes of Aquarius I love to be recognized as. But at the end of the day, I can't necessarily live in Aquarius or some of those characteristics without finding myself exhausted and would need more of like rest and recovery or recuperation. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Yes, it does. Let me just back up a little bit. So we can't help but be our rising sign or ascendant because it's there. And we may over identify it to the extent that it wins us what we need, which will be represented in the sun. So we may over-identify with it to the extent that it gives us what we need and still protects us. And so they have to learn to work together. And some signs work really good together. For example, your sun is in the sign of Gemini and your rising is Aquarius. So they're both air signs. So they work well together. They both have a very social quality. So your burnout has a lot to do with the overactivity of the mind and socializing.
Yes.
But you can't get away from it. We just need to find out, how do we balance you by restoring what you need, which is represented in the moon sign.
It sounds like, too, what you were asking, how you're framing it, it sounds like that's just part of the individuation process. It's like, as we are children learning about ourselves and the world and relating to others, we identify with what people say about us as the child archetype. And then as we grow and mature and learn about our home, then we are able to kind of still be identified or express some of those, but less like, oh, that is me, or I have to behave that way.
Just to use an example in my life, I will step into a social atmosphere or environment or even the workplace, and I will have the perception of having been charismatic, a leader, relatively intelligent, funny, and I'm not saying I'm not those things, but sometimes I get away from that, and I kind of I'll crush it in a certain environment, and I'll step away and go, fuck, I'm tired. Or oh shit, I just said yes to 6 things that I don't really want to do. But when I was in that moment, in my fucking ego, I was like, yeah, I can do it. Perfect. But I kind of step away from that and go, oh my God, I don't know if I have the capacity to handle that.
It was the performing nature, or the wanting to be on stage a little bit, but you don't want to be on stage longer than you want to be on stage.
Yeah.
You want to be off stage as soon as you want to be off stage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, but I think let's not give the ascendant or the sun sign a bad rap in terms of the ego part. You're doing you in that moment, and you're caught up in the relating. It's air. Air gets caught up in anything that it's around, but you have a water Cancer moon. And so that need for retreat, and that need for silence, and that need for your own time, and that need for you and your one loved one and your teddy bear is what drives everything.
Yep.
So this is a great example of how there is an imbalance just in the big three. The big three are the sun, the moon, and the ascendant of who you are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So
good. Okay.
Anything else on ascendant that we need to touch before we move into summer?
Not at the moment. No, not at the moment. We'll come back to that when we start to explore the house system.
Okay.
Great.
We've moved through spring into...
So we start with the spring, right? And that is where the ascendant is. And moving down, we'll go to the 4th house now. So this would be equivalent to 6 o'clock on a clock. And this will be the angle that is known as the nadir. And this is represented by Cancer or by the summer solstice. And this will then make up Cancer, Leo, and Virgo. And so this is the next season. And so we know this if we follow the seasons. We're just about to enter into spring, which is comprised of Aries, Taurus, and Gemini. After Gemini, we move to Cancer, which is where the solstice is. And so each of these signs is broken up into particular seasons. And of course, those seasons vary depending on which side of the world you're on, what side of the equator you're on. But for the purposes of what we're learning, the natal horoscope is not just a map of consciousness, but it's also a clock. It's a clock. It's a seasonal clock. It depicts our development over the course of our lifetime, right? And as a microcosmic view, it also depicts the journey of the sun or our soul over the course of a year.
Okay, so this is Cancer, Leo, Virgo. And so this aspect would be the sun is what we're focusing on. And we just focused on the ascendant.
We focused on the ascendant as a placement in the horoscope, but now what we'll focus on are the constituents or the planets and the luminaries. So let's start with the sun, because the sun is what everybody knows. And this is a good time to make the point that unfortunately, like we just saw, there are so many other constituents to the chart that the sun is only one aspect. However, it is the most important aspect. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about the sun. First of all, the sun will fall into a particular constellation at the moment of birth. And there are 30 degrees, just like there are 30 days to each of these signs. So when a person is born, say, for example, what's the date? The 12th? Today is March 12th. The sun is, I don't know, it's probably at about 20 something degrees of Pisces. So when we're looking at this sun, the sun represents the process of becoming who we are over the course of our life. Let that sink in. Who we are over the course of our life. We are not born with all of the ingredients that make us who we are. It is through time and experience and challenge and crisis that we begin to develop the qualities that are already innately within us, which means that we also inherit the challenges that are innate to each of those signs, because each sign is a process of consciousness. It's a process of human experience. And so while we break these up into 12 archetypal human experiences, we are composed of each one of those. But whichever sun sign we have is essentially the stage that we are living that this experience or, evolution iteration on. That makes sense?
Yeah. So in this, if I'm getting this right, for me, my sun is Leo. In this incarnation, I am at the stage of Leo where I'm learning Leo lessons, right?
Yes.
And so my next incarnation could be Gemini or Virgo or whatever, where my lessons might look a little bit different.
Yes.
Okay. So Chase his sun is in Gemini. So you are learning the Gemini lessons through this incarnation.
Right. But I assume,
Yes.
because I've never heard you mention this before, that astrology doesn't necessarily have this sort of like complete the wheel of 12 before you can enlighten yourself to, some evolution of
Nirvana.
consciousness or something. That's not part of the system.
You know what? I'm the Hierophant today, and I don't know that.
Yeah.
But I would love to believe that is the case. How
Okay.
simple would it be?
Yeah.
12 lives, and maybe
Right.
we're done.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to make sure, because we're using terms like incarnation and that
Yeah.
we are not sort of assuming or subscribing any sort of like higher reincarnation
No.
sort of system
No.
to astrology.
Not at all.
Got it. Okay.
We're speaking in metaphor because none of us fucking know.
No.
None of us know. And so it's like, it helps us move the game pieces if we can at least, we have to use words.
Well,
we
and-
have to
right.
describe. And so it's like, yeah, we don't know.
But it is a map,
But
and this
Yeah.
map helps us with the terrain. And the terrain in this case is life,
Yeah. Sure.
right? And it's our relationship to life, which is very important. And I do want to just say, just because I'm a Virgo, and I want to clarify that there is absolutely a branch of astrology that does subscribe to the evolutionary aspect of it and the karmic aspect of it. That's not what we're focusing on today, but
Yep. Cool.
just
It's
want to
there.
acknowledge that. Yes.
Okay.
Cool. Okay.
So what we're saying here, though, is that sun sign, you're born with what you need to be this sign because you are it, and then you are in experience with life in a way that's going to help you develop that. You can't get away from it, is what I'm saying. So let me give you a perfect example of this, because Leo is a perfect example of this. So first of all, Leo is ruled by the sun, and that's very important. So the sun in its own sign of Leo is in a wonderful placement. Now, where this breaks down, and this, these are some of the misnomers, is that just because somebody is born a Leo, it doesn't mean that they, pop out of the womb singing some sort of show tune and, ready to tap dance for others. But what it does mean is that expression of life, think about the sun and the rays that are emanating, and it's through that emanation that everything else is lit up and there is light. Well, that is the job of a Leo. Leo is to express and to emanate their light. And their light may be nothing other than video games. You know, it doesn't matter. There's no judgment on that, but they need to express it. And so if we have Leos that are like, I'm not a Leo at all. I'm so shy. I can't even go out of the house and I don't want to be the center of attention at all. It doesn't excuse them from the lesson that they are still going to move through in this experience of their life.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because like your sister Callie is also a Leo. I'm a Leo, but we show up in Leo very differently, where we're literally on a stage with podcasting, and you know, Callie lives on a farm with her 2 boys and her husband, and she wouldn't sign up to be on stage. Let's just put it that way. And so when we've talked about it with her, she's like, I don't really understand. I don't feel like a Leo, because she sees me as a Leo, and she's like, we're very different.
But she is living on her stage. It's her life the way she wants, doing what she loves, surrounded by the people that she gets to radiate her light on. And she wouldn't take it any other way.
And that's what I've explained to her. And so this is where it's so great to break out of the Cosmo type, the Cosmopolitan magazine type horoscope. Oh, you're a Leo, then it means you're this. It's like this, there's layers, as we've said many times.
So if we're going back to the analogy of the door, and we've got the ascending or rising as the door, and it's this sort of experience of having first seen the home, if you will, the sun would potentially be analogous to just the type of home itself. So like, let's say it's a farmhouse versus a suburban house versus a beach house, and there's, for each one, there's a different purpose for where they're, you know, located real estate wise.
What's your Mercurian? What are you making me work for here? What is your Mercurian? Look at your signs.
What's my Mercurian?
Is it in Taurus?
It might be.
No, I hear you. I'm going to check out his Mercury. Yep, he's got Mercury in Taurus, guys. And so rather than just letting me make some really like loose connections here, like a Gemini would do, he wants to nail me down, and he wants this to be very specific and rational. And he wants me to stick with the same goddamn metaphor that I started with, that I now wish I never said anything about the front door. Anyway, that's a great example of how, you know, understanding your sun, you may not even be able to express the fullness of your sun, because you have these emissaries, that being Mercury, the way that you think and communicate, Venus, the way that you relate and what you love and how you attract, and Mars, how you assert yourself, apply your energy, and go after what you want. And so here, this is a perfect example of Gemini and Taurus, any sign that is back to back next to each other, they are the least alike. They have the most unlike. They are the most unlike each other, right? So, hint to self: if you're in a relationship with somebody that has the sign on either side of you, it's challenging in that way.
Interesting.
But I will answer your question. It's not a house then. The sun is the world. It's the palace. It's the observer, and it is the observed.
Okay.
Right. And so it's almost as if the sun has to shine through that doorway. So imagine, here you go. You're going to love this. Imagine that you just opened the doorway to heaven, the kingdom of heaven. And when you open that doorway, you're flooded with light, and you're flooded with light that doesn't have anything that makes sense in your mind, but it's a feeling.
Okay.
It's a sense.
Got it.
And you understand that feeling and that sense through the doorway.
Got it.
Does that help?
Yep. I will continue to nurture this analogy.
Please do. Oh, please do. I love it.
Great.
Right. So no, but it's a great example in that, you know, this sun is, it's just who you are. It's your process that you're just doing in the world. You, and it's like, you know, telling a fish, like, do you know you swim in water? A fish wouldn't know it swims in water because it knows nothing different. Right. But here's where people that come, you know, and seek out astrology, they often want to know, like, am I following my purpose? Am I doing what I'm meant to do? Am I shining in the way that feels aligned? Then we look to the sun.
Yeah.
That's what we came here to do, is to be our sun.
Right. That's
great.
great. That's a great reminder as I evolve my relationship with Gemini.
Yeah.
With myself.
Yep.
Is there anything else regarding the sun that is important to highlight, or maybe something like a misunderstanding, or something that would help us build from the conversation?
The sun and the moon are in relationship with each other. So we could, if we wanted to, we could break them up into, this expressive form, which we would call masculine. And the sun could represent the father. And the mother is more receptive, or it's the feminine, and it would represent the mother. And so there's a relationship between the sun and the moon, like we'll see paralleled in in Venus and Mars. But the sun and the moon have to work together, right? Think about that in terms of, we look up in the sky.
Yep.
The moon does what? How does the moon shine?
The reflection of the sun.
Right. So there's this co-connection, this collaboration that has to happen between the two. And so if the sun is this, beautiful Leo that wants to shine, but it's got a very shy Virgo moon that only wants to shine in particular ways and it has to look this way, then that sun may be under some stress. And so what we're trying to do is look at how easy is it for the sun to express itself, which brings me to the next important point. Where the sun is located in your natal chart, which you only will know if you know your birth time and your birthplace, whichever house the sun is placed in also becomes the area of life in which it is either the easiest to express yourself or where you will naturally feel like yourself.
Okay, so for example, my sun is in the 5th house. What would that say, or what would that mean for me?
Well, the first thing I'll say about that is that the sun in the 5th house is natally ruled by Leo. So as I was talking about, what I'm looking at are themes that are building. So you've got a sun that's in the 5th house, a sun in Leo in the 5th house. That's where it's happy, it wants to be. The sun in the 5th house is the house of personal expression and creativity and love given. It's the house of our speculations. It's the house of play. It's the house of children. So a Leo is going to be most happy in this 5th house because it's like, oh, great, I was born in the environment that I know best how to thrive. Now, whether or not that your sun is under any stress, as evidenced by its relationships to other planets, will tell me, the astrologer, how easy it is for you to shine. Now, what's interesting is that Chase's sun is in the 3rd house, and that's natally the house of Gemini, and he's a Gemini. So again, both of your suns, which this doesn't happen all the time, both of your suns are in the area of life in which they most easily and naturally express themselves. Isn't that cool?
Got it.
That is really cool. Yeah, and that doesn't happen all the time.
No.
Yeah.
No. So these are the patterns that we're looking for.
Have we defined house? And if not, can we just touch on what that means?
Yes. So in that sense, we have the importance with the sun is what sign it's in, what house it's in. And those houses, as we were just saying, are each of those individual slices, the 12 slices in a horoscope. And each house represents a particular area of life. So the first house, which is the house that the ascendant falls on, the first house it represents our sense of self, our identity. How many different times do we have identity crisis in our life? Who am I? Who am I really? Right. So each of these houses illuminates an area of life.
Okay.
Got it.
And we're going to get into the houses. We're going to touch on the houses
At
in
the very
later
end.
in later episodes. But obviously, we still need to talk about them just generally as like
The structure.
the structure.
Yeah.
Okay. So where do we go from here?
So from here, let's go to the moon because these luminaries work together. So the moon is also a really important placement. And the moon changes signs every 2.5 days, which is why people are not aware of their moon sign as easily as they are their sun, because the sun stays in the same sign for 30 days. So that moon represents the internal life. This represents our emotional self. It houses all of our memories, particularly the memories that are pre-verbal. It also represents the pattern of attachments or how we attach. most importantly, what it represents is what we need. We are all driven by our needs and motivations, and those needs and motivations are in different styles, so to speak, when they are in different signs. And so whatever that need is that drives us, the sun wants to express, but it is most fulfilled when it is also feeling safe and secure. So the moon represents our inner world of safety and security, the pattern of that, how we connect with others. As it also represents those early memories, it will represent the mother as well. And so whatever was going on, with your mother as you were cooking in her belly is also an imprint on our own psyches, on our own souls, because we absorb the water, right? The moon is water, the primordial water. We absorb the water. We are born in the water, and the water is the carrier of memory. Right. And so our bodies are made up of these cosmic memories that have been passed down through our connection to our mother and her connection to her mother, and so on and so forth. So you see again, the relationship between the stars and us continues to be mirrored in the relationship of interdependency, interconnection.
That's so fascinating as you think about, obviously, this about us, but we're in the stage of like talking about conception. We haven't officially tried yet, but it makes me think about what flavor I am going to be and want to add to my amniotic water as I bake our baby, because I think about, the mother, my mother. I won't speak specifically, but I know that we deal with a lot of the same internal stories and fears. And my parents were divorced when I was 2. So leading up to that time, 2 years prior, I know what was going on in her body, in her mind, because she's told me, in their relationship, and a lot of the fears and stories that she was telling herself, I now have been telling myself.
Inherited. You have inherited.
And I experienced those same fears and stories, and we've talked about this, and it almost feels like it's mine to work through and heal if I can, but at least just acknowledge so that it doesn't go unknown.
Well, maybe even if we worked with your astrology, just the sun and the moon, if you think about that, your moon is in the sign of Libra. And so what you just shared, the one piece that you shared was about your parents' relationship and how you were formed at the end of their relationship, right? That relationships for you, your craving and your desire to express, there's the Leo, a new emanation, a new expression of relationship, right? That's what Leo wants to do for Libra, but the fears that you have are what you are transforming. Right? Because Libra is about that balance, and you coming into the world under, the conditions that you did are also what drive you to experience the other side, and not only experience it because you're a Leo, you want to embody it, and you want to teach it, and you want to share it, and you want to give birth to it, right? We could continue and talk about that 5th house.
Oh, it's so cool. And same with you, what your mom was experiencing right up until the point where she got Chase is a miracle baby. Did you know this?
I don't know if I did.
Chase is, we just talked about this when we were visiting your parents, your mom and I. She was going through some health issues and was not having a period for like a year. And then she got
4 years.
Yeah. Okay. So 4 years did not have a cycle. And Chase was conceived as a miracle baby.
There it is.
Is that why you're the chosen one?
That's not much. I am the chosen one.
Immaculate conception.
I just, but a lot of the things that your mom was dealing with that could have baked into the amniotic water are things that you now are also getting the opportunity to transform.
Sure. And and what came up for me in my first session ever with you was the relationship to mother, and how much of my life has been this sort of like loop of how I interacted with my mother and basically projected onto any feminine anything in my life, as was I had this sort of like mother-like relationship to it. And that was mind-blowing. And is that something that applies here as we're talking about?
Oh, absolutely. Moon? I mean, you got a Cancer moon. I mean, anytime, anybody's got a Cancer moon, that the formative years of that relationship with their mother is equally important. Even more important. Not that it's not for everybody, but again, this is where, of course, everybody's going to come into the world and they're going to experience, what it means to express talents in themselves and teach and grow. And people are going to come into the world and experience what it means to be a mother. But those that are Cancers can't get away from it, right? And so the experience of mother for you is first an experience that's outside of you until it becomes an experience that's internalized, right? So this is where that self-love and caring for yourself and tending to yourself just enough that you can then resource all of that desire to be social and socialize with others, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So that moon then becomes so incredibly important to somebody's mental health, right? Their sense of stability and security. And ultimately, because we live in this, very dangerous terrestrial form, we need to feel emotionally safe.
For sure.
But how do people feel emotionally safe? And that's what, each of the signs then determines. So I'll use myself as an example. I have a moon, which is all about safety and security. And when you start to think that out, we think consistency, reliability. What are all the words that make us feel really safe, right? Then I've got this moon that's in the sign of, it's a fire Sagittarius moon. So the two are sort of an oxymoron. Sagittarius and fire is not about security, consistency, responsibility. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
So this will then say for somebody like myself that my experience of security is going to bring with it this little sense of restlessness. And that maybe if I am totally stable, doing nothing and just, feeding my cats and having no adventures, I'm not going to feel secure. I'm actually going to feel restless because what I need is adventure. So you see how we begin to see the complexity of that we all need the same thing, but we need it in different ways.
Got it.
It's like the seasoning
Exactly.
that is on the meal. The meal could be made up of the same constituents or ingredients, but the seasoning is like what really gives it the flavor on your tongue.
Yes. Yeah. So the sun and the moon, most important. Everything else must be shown through the sun and the moon.
Are there, for lack of a better term, positive combinations of sun and moon?
Yes. Easier.
And negative. Yeah. Easier.
Easier expressions.
More
yes.
fluid, whatever. Yeah.
So like, for example, my moon in Sagittarius is not an easy expression for that. A moon in Aquarius, anytime we find a sign, which we're going to talk in detail about the signs coming up, anytime we find a sign that sort of contradicts the planet that it's placed in, that's where we know that it's challenging then for either the person to get their needs met or the person to express themselves. So yes, some signs are easier expressed.
Got it. Okay.
And how would one know? Would they just need to talk to an astrologer to know which signs are they easy and not easily expressed?
I mean, by the end of these 4 episodes, they're definitely going to know because that's what we're talking about here.
Okay.
Yeah. And
cool.
this is so much more intuitive than people realize. We just want to give them the structure and the language.
Sure. Yeah. That is what has been some of the most profound breakthroughs, having worked with astrology, even on just a small scale, has been, wow, I knew that. Thank you for placing that in a way that I can actually understand it with my mind and not just my body.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to keep going with a few questions, wanting to evolve into, what an astrologer would say should the questions be posed around communication, relationships, some of these others. But one defining of terms that I wanted to make sure we make is elements. You've mentioned, it's an air sign, that's a water sign. What do we mean by that? What does that have to do with these charts and who we are?
We'll get there right after the planets.
Okay,
that's great. Thanks for that structure.
Great.
Before we move on to the personal planets, is there anything else on the chart as we're looking at the seasons that you want to touch on?
No, we'll talk more. We'll talk more about the seasons when we get into the signs. But for today, with the sun and the moon, the ascendant, and now we'll talk about those personal planets.
Okay,
and you described them. You said that the Mercury is the personal planet. Now think about this. You learned this in like kindergarten, right? Where the planets are in relation to the sun. What do you remember how it went? Something like,
oh gosh,
let's see, it's like my very excellent mother just sat under new pines.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
well
there we
done.
go, right? So Mercury, Venus, Mars are on one side of the sun. My very excellent. Nope. Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. And so I say this because it's important to know that Mercury travels really close to the sun. So whatever your sun sign is in, it is likely that Mercury is going to either be in the same sign or the sign before it or after it. Now, what is Mercury? Mercury is a planet that represents the way that we think. It's how we process information. It's how we communicate. And most importantly, it's how we develop our perspective on life, right? So it's our attitude and our perspective. It's how we make connections. Mercury rules the signs Gemini and Virgo. Let's just put that on the side there and note then that, wow, Geminis and Virgos must be very much about Mercury. Right. We'll note that. So what Mercury represents beyond that is it's also the way in which we make sense of things. And so we saw a great example of that a moment ago when Chase wanted to use the metaphor in went from being simplistic to, operational. And so your Mercury in the sign of Taurus is far more operational and systems oriented and rational and tangible than is your Gemini self. And so Mercury helps us understand how does a person process information. So for example, as a teacher, when I'm teaching astrology, I look at everybody's Mercuries because then I can see, is this person, do they learn kinesthetically? Do they learn, how are they going to learn so that I can best teach them? And how can we apply this in relationships? Well, relationships are all about communication, right? And so if we understand that each of us has our own flavor or style of communicating, then we don't have the assumption that they should communicate this certain way.
So my Mercury, if I'm looking at my chart correctly, is in Virgo. And so what would that mean? And I have a hunch on when you just said like, how do they learn? How can I teach them best? Looking at Mercury and where it lands. If you saw that for me as a student, what would you say?
Well, it's Earth, which we'll get there, but I would say that you learned in a systematic way. You need to break things up into their original forms, and you're analytical, and you need to understand how the pieces go together. And unlike a Gemini, who is also ruled by Mercury, yours is going to have to go in a particular order, and you're going to first filter out all the unnecessary stuff. Whereas Gemini, they want all the information. Virgos want only the information that's useful and is applicable. And so when you're learning something, you're immediately thinking to yourself, how can I use this? How can I apply this? Because in learning it, if we know how to use it, we are better able at integrating it. And since our main purview as a Virgo is to organize and create order out of chaos. And so that's what you are doing with knowledge.
I find that if I really want to learn something, I will read it, highlight the important parts, and then write it down myself on a separate thing. And then it's like locked in my brain. And then if I can teach it to someone, then it's in there for good.
Yep. And you just described, a kinesthetic way of learning, right? You hit all the different ways. You take it in, you rewrite it, there's an active, and then you teach it. So there's an integration.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense.
And it's let's just point this out then. So then say, for example, we have Mercury in Pisces. Mercury is not happy in Pisces. So going back to that place, some placements are easy. Mercury in Virgo is its natural placement. It's very happy there. But its opposite, Pisces, it's like trying to talk underwater. How do we take something that is supposed to be rational and ask a Pisces to rationalize it? It's the opposite of that, right? Which doesn't mean that Pisces can't talk and communicate. It means that they have to find other ways to express themselves. And so it's a water sign. May express themselves more emphatically. They're going to use metaphor, an analogy, subtext, something that makes you feel. It's subjective versus then it being objective. So did we grow up in a school system that supports that? No. And so oftentimes we find that Mercury in a water sign, Mercury in the sign of Pisces in particular, they struggled with some sort of educational disability. And it may not even been that they had the disability. It was that they were put into a system, right, that didn't accommodate their needs.
Right.
This is where I can see, there's so many instances of this, so many examples of why this would be important. But when you have a kid, getting a natal chart done and
Absolutely.
looking at every single one of these aspects, not as a concrete map of how you have to teach and raise your child, but just like as a guide, as an aid
Exactly.
that you can. And I'm just like, I'm so excited to do that someday
that
with you.
understanding. Yeah.
One of the things that's coming up for me as we talk about, some of these, like, let's just say conflicts, for lack of a better term, that would limit one's own ability to quote unquote think well. But what might show up for them is that they're a beautiful artist who actually communicates and or thinks through this other modality called painting that, when witnessed, blows people away, because that person themselves may not have been able to sit in the group project at school and contribute that much with their mouth or with their mind in the very left or right, top to bottom way that school might suggest you have to, showcase your ability to think. But when partaking in a hobby or a craft like painting, they're able to communicate and think thoughts that transcend, logic and reason. And you're like, holy shit, I never knew that person was that smart.
Yeah, it reminds me of the mandala workshops that we've been to at Paul Chek's, when we all paint mandalas. I have like a plan, and I'm like really detail oriented, and then we explain. We go up into the front of the room, and we explain what our experience was, and we've had a few like legitimately astounding artists in our group who, like, they are artists in their real life, and they paint this beautiful thing, or maybe a few, and when they go to explain their experience, they're kind of just like, this is it.
They're not overly articulate.
They're not in their head about it. They're not in
just
their
like,
head.
this is what I did, and this is what I was feeling, and it just, you're waiting for them to explain this amazing piece of art, and they're just like, this is it. And it's so funny how it would make me think, like, that person's Mercury is probably in Pisces or
a water sign.
Yeah, water
Right.
sign.
Which, we need to talk about those elements.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. So we talked about
Mercury.
And now we have Venus. Now, Venus and Mars, we're going to understand them as a pair, because they are a pair. And archetypally, what they describe are masculine and feminine energy. So the other planets are not masculine and feminine, because masculine and feminine in and of themselves is an archetype. They don't exist. It's an archetype. It's a way of understanding. Venus, as the quintessential feminine, describes very simply how we relate to others, the process or the style in which we relate to others. It describes what we need to, what we love, or what we desire. It also describes beauty, and it describes the process of attraction. So it's what we attract, right? If it's feminine, it's attracting. So Venus then is going to be for, in relationships, it's going to represent that thing that we're attracted to, the other. It doesn't have to be, if I'm a woman, it doesn't need to be Mars or Venus. In general, Venus represents what we are attracted to, no matter what gender we are. Okay. And so, yes, some of Venus will be expressed more easily than others. I should also say that Venus rules two signs, Taurus and Libra. Okay, so the sign that Venus is in is going to describe what you're attracted to and what you love and how you relate to others. So now let me say this. What if Venus was in the sign of Aries?
Which for Chase it is, right? Yeah.
Tell me about myself, please.
Tell me about myself, please. There you go. You just said it. I mean, you just literally depicted what Venus in Aries is. Say it again.
Tell me about myself, please.
Exactly. So Venus is supposed to be about the other. It is the process of relating to the other. But when Venus is in the sign of an Aries, it wants to know about itself in relation to that other more than perhaps it does the other. And so it's a selfish placement in that sense.
Oh God, that's so interesting. Okay. It's funny, we do this podcast and there's so many things that I'm involved in, and sometimes we'll get the feedback like, thank you so much for what you're doing for others. And I'm like, I'm not doing it for others. I'm trying to learn more about myself. I'm trying to learn more in the process. I love that that's a byproduct.
Yeah,
Honestly,
yeah, of
I
course.
do love that that's a byproduct, everybody. Thank you for listening to the show. But I'm also like kind of I'm doing this for me.
We're learning and we're on our own, but it's different. I can't identify with that at all. I'm always thinking about the listener. I'm always thinking about what is their experience right now? What is their question that they have? At least I do my best to keep them in mind. And that's just, it's so interesting.
Did I nail it there?
You totally nailed it. I love you. And then I love that you have Mimi over here going, I can't help but think about the other. And what sign is your Venus in?
Virgo.
Yeah. So it's all about service. You know, that Venus, again, like what turns you on, right? There's Venus as well. And what you love is, how can I be of service to others? How can I teach? How can we grow together? How can I tell you the best way to be yourself? You know, how can I give you all the unsolicited advice that you don't ask so that you know that I love you? But I'm going to tell you from a place of love what you're doing wrong and how you should be doing it right.
Great.
If anyone has listened to the show for any amount of time, you've probably heard me say multiple times, when I feel like I have information that can help someone, it physically hurts me not to tell them. It is so uncomfortable. And this is something that I've had to learn through. I've had to learn and grow in this area, because not everyone wants to be helped. Not everyone wants advice.
No.
And so I have to read into that. I have to read the room. I have to check myself, and I have to ask permission.
Or just look at the expression on my face.
Yeah, because Chase is the opposite extreme, where he's like, don't, stop, don't say that, don't go there. And I'm like, but it's going to really help them.
Okay. Oh God. You're perfect. No, and that is a perfect depiction. Honestly, let me come back to real, because what you described in there is the expression of all of your signs together. So let me just break that down. It hurts if I don't express myself. There's Leo. I have to express myself. I'm the sun. I'm going to burn up on the inside if I don't shine my rays. Yeah. Well, what kind of rays do you want to shine? Like, what do you really want to express? So now we move to Mercury, because this is what she's thinking about. This is what she cares about. This is what she wants to talk about. And Venus, how am I going to relate this to others? How am I going to give this to others? What do they want? What do they need? Mars, we haven't got to yet, but this is how I'm going to apply that. This is the strategy I'm going to use. But here's the beautiful part, Mimi, is that you said, I've had to learn to read the room. I've had to pay attention to whether I am being invited. And that's the decorum of that Libra moon. The Libra moon so desires to connect with others. And it's all through all of your personal planets are in the sign of Virgo, making it very easy and not, especially if you're partner. But that Virgo energy just wants to express useful information that will help and possibly save another person's life. So that is a perfect expression of how all of your personal planets are or the emissary are doing the bidding of the sun and the moon.
I have expressed this before I even knew anything about astrology or planets or the sun or the moon or the rising or anything. It was like, this is just the flavor of who I am and how I show up and relate to others.
Yep. Yeah.
Whether it be in my personal relationships, my family, friends, but also in the world. It doesn't change. Yeah, it's just crazy how that shows up. Anything else about Venus?
Again, the Venus, these signs, these personal planets, which house they fall in also becomes important, because it's in that area of life that they will most easily get to know and express themselves. There's another more advanced signature to that, but we'll save it for another time. When you're looking at a horoscope, if in a relationship, rather than saying, okay, my sun is in this sign and the other person's sun is in this sign, do we make a good match?
Yeah, there's so much more.
Right. But one thing that you want to look at is you want to look at the other person's Venus. Because if you want them to be attracted to you, then you go and embody their Venus, right? If you are a big, giant, hardcore Capricorn and you're so harsh, but you see that your partner has a Venus that's in Pisces, then, trying to teach them the right way to go about something is not their love language.
No.
Yeah. So I want to come back to Chase's Venus in Aries. how else could that manifest for him?
Well, for you as his partner, he's also going to be attracted to somebody that is independent, that is confident, that is strong. Now, if that's not something that he has integrated in himself, then he may, I'm going to talk about you in third person, he may feel intimidated by it because perhaps this is now we go to the moon. If the mother didn't express her confidence and strength as a woman, then that's going to be something that Chase craves, but he may have to go through a series of weak women to get to that point of strength that he is then attracted to, because it's a reflection of him, not a projection of his insecurity. So Venus holds either the ultimate reflection of our beloved and or the projection of our unintegrated beloved. In other words, self-love.
Great. Got it.
You know how Venus also shows up in Aries for men? Flirts. As a Gemini with Venus and Aries, bet you all the ladies loved you.
Great.
Oh, yeah.
Great flirting abilities here.
Because it's all about you. You want the attention.
Yeah, interesting. Wow.
Tell me about myself, please.
Yeah. Well, good thing we're childhood sweethearts.
But you had attention from very, 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 very young ages.
For sure.
Well, but
He was the kid that all the girls were following around and like,
totally
fixated on.
And I think though that, again, this is where looking at this and saying that it's healthy is to say that that's still important for you though, Chase, and as you're, a dad and you move into dad bod stage and all that.
No way.
Yeah.
Not happening.
You totally. Well, they're getting sexier by the day, but it's going to put you in that place where when you're going through some of your midlife crisis, it's going to be important that, those women are winking at you and smiling at you. And if you feel somewhere in you, oh my God, I'm emotionally cheating on Mimi. Well, first of all, not only is that immature, but it won't allow you to get some of those needs met that are not completely contingent upon one person on earth.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, that's super important. Taking notes.
Good.
That's great.
All right. So let's talk about Mars.
Let's do it. Mars.
Masculine. So if we have Venus as the feminine, here we have Mars as the masculine. And we know this intuitively. So think about what Mars looks like. If you know the glyph, most of us do, it's a little circle and it's got a little penis with an arrow on the end, penetrating, right? What does masculine energy want to do? It wants to penetrate. So this is energy. This is the energy that we apply. It's how we do. It's the style of doing, how I go after something. It's the conquering energy in us. So it's also going to be reflective of what triggers us and how we express our anger and defense. And so the two have to work hand in hand, Venus and Mars. They don't always, but they need to. And so Mars in our horoscope, think of it this way. Remember I said the sun was masculine energy too, right? So is Mars. So Mars is like the knight to the king. The knight is carrying out the action on behalf of not only the sun, but the moon as well. So think about that for a moment. If this is action and we say like Mars, this bold planet is in the sign of Cancer.
What is yours? Pisces.
What does this mean for me?
Well, from what you've just know a little bit about Pisces and Mars, does it feel like it would go hand in hand?
No.
Not at all.
It's a water sign.
Yeah, it's the sweetest water sign of all. It wants no conflict. And it's in the sign of conflict. I mean, same as I have Venus, I have Mars in the sign of Libra. So I go to war for peace. You'll go to war for love, right? It's what will I protect and defend?
Wow. Beautiful.
And how well do I feel equipped to do that? So, Mars in a water sign it doesn't want to fight. It's like Ferdinand the Bull, just, smelling the roses.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And mine is in Virgo.
And yours is in Virgo, which...
Interesting that all of my personal planets are in Virgo.
Yes, ma'am. You're more Virgo than anything else. So Mars in Virgo, Mars wants to go out and attack. It doesn't want to have to think things through. It doesn't need to wonder if it, locked the doors and it turned off the power. But Mars in Virgo is thinking about all those details. Yeah, but should I? Well, what if I do this? And if I do this, then that will happen. And how can I do that? And you know what? I'm just going to complain about everything instead. Everything's a problem.
I do actually remember that from the first our first session with you, you brought up the fact, and I didn't know what you were looking at in my chart, to be like, you complain a lot. And I was like, how did you know that? Because you're probably looking at Mars and Virgo. Or, Mars and Virgo. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Because you're probably like, yeah, she does.
Yeah. Well, I think it's for both of us, that can be a thing where we sort of like find slippery slope, where we can kind of like ignite each other's ability to complain. Mine's more like analytical. I can just pick something apart very easily. And then yours might be more of like a complaining.
It feels like, though, for me, complaining is like an avenue for my processing. It's not me saying I'm unhappy with everything. And this is something that we've actually, at least I've picked up on in our relationship, where I might voice something because I feel like I'm processing it, and he picks up on it, views it as she's unhappy. How can I fix this? Or
that's my mother wound.
Right. And what I need to communicate to you in those moments is like, I don't need you to fix anything. I'm merely just sharing my experience of how to process the difficult situation that is in my mind. Yeah. Does that fit?
It does fit really well. And I think what's really beautiful about your relationship too is it's not, I mean, we could say it's in part your Cancer moon, but more, you've got Mars in Pisces and she's got Mars in Virgo. They're opposites. And so you set each other off in all the best ways, because Mars is also our libido and it's our sex life and it's arousal, but in all the other ways as well. And so when you're picking apart things analytically, you're totally feeding into her Mars and Virgo that wants to do all of that.
Yeah.
Right. But what you need in those moments is the same thing you're feeling, like you just want peace. And when she starts picking apart things, you're like, okay, shit, now I gotta do this too. Like, what am I gonna throw in the ring? And then you just pick apart things, and then you're like, okay, maybe she'll just ruminate on that and I'll just tune out. Right. So you need peace in those moments. And what you just said, I'm just processing. I just need you to shake your head and go, that's great. Yep. That must feel this way. You'll work really well with each other in that respect.
That's great.
Yeah. And it feels like there are a lot of complementary aspects where we can show up in different ways, but almost like help each other come to something in the middle of each of those aspects.
Mirroring.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Mars, masculine, carrying out the action, what you would go to war for. I love that.
Yep. So that's our kingdom right there. And those three, just by knowing those three, if you look somebody, your friend or loved one's information up, it will tell you something about them. You know, it tells you how they think and communicate. So that tells you how you might need to compromise in order to, really communicate is about being heard. It will tell you how that person relates, the style of relating, and what bothers them or what really charges them, what they're passionate about.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's it. There's a lot more, but if you keep it simple, we can start with that.
Excellent.
Shall we break down the elements?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
And we'll go into more depth with the elements as we go into the signs in the next episode. But simply stated, each of the signs, there are 12 signs, are broken into elements. And these elements can be traced back from the beginning of time. These are, every cosmology, every ancient tradition always works with the elements because they are the constituents of life. So the elements that we work with are fire, water, air, and earth. Fire and air are masculine. Earth and water are feminine. Each of these elements has a particular characteristic, and that characteristic is going to show up in the makeup of that sign. I'll give you an example in a second, but let me also say that each sign is also made up of what's called a certain mode. There are 3 modes: cardinal, fixed, and mutable. These are intuitive. We start something, we hold it and preserve it, and then we change and adapt it and move on. So each sign is an element and a mode, and that element and mode describes the qualities of that sign.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep, I remember that. Okay.
So let's start with just giving a workable example, and then we'll break it up. Let's start with Aries because it's the first sign. Aries is the first sign. It's cardinal and it's fire. So cardinal and fire, we expect an explosion. We expect a springing from the ground. So cardinal initiates. Fire also initiates, but fire is the spark of our life. It's the passion. It's what animates us, right? It is what energizes us. It is what makes us feel like we are the hero in our own life journey. Okay, so now we have a cardinal fire sign. They are initiating experiences. They are the bold ones that go where no one else will go. They're the ones that can't help but say the first thing that comes off the top of their heads.
Christina Rice is an Aries.
Yeah.
Also, Aaron Abke is an Aries.
Totally. Yep.
And they're pioneers. They are the ones that start things off. So when we start to take all of these elements and modes and put them together, we have the backbone of each sign. And we'll do that more directly in the next episode. But just for this sake, fire. Fire starts everything. Fire is passion. It's the creation. It's the spark of everything. So people that are fire-oriented, what do you think? What is the personality going to be like? You're fire?
Self-starter, internal mode of motivation, probably early risers, growth-oriented, can execute a task list well.
Because they're energetic. Doesn't mean they can execute them because that requires some organization. But the energetic part of wanting to start things off, right? And they're fiery and passionate, which doesn't always mean that they can stay the course.
I was going to say, if they burn, do they burn out?
They can very easily burn out if there's not something to sustain them. But I think that for a workable example, I want to just bring this in. So I talked about those modes, cardinal starting, fixed is holding, it's the preserver. So if we have a fixed fire sign, now we have somebody that can hold the course, that is sustained by the process of passion generating. They can execute the whole task list because their whole goal is to sustain the vision. So what are you? A Leo. So your example of fire was an expression of you who happens to be a fixed sign. You're capable of that fire element in ways that Aries and Sagittarius struggle.
Okay, because Aries is cardinal and Sagittarius is mutable.
Very good. Very good.
Mutable is another synonymous for changeable, right? Okay.
Changing and adapting.
Changing,
and adapting and refining. It's life and it's holding and it's death and changing. So fire starts everything off. And then the next one we have is water. I should also say that fire is intuitive. It's not a rational sign. It's instinctive. It does things quickly because it feels the instinct. Water is intuitive. It's emotional. It senses its surroundings.
So that would be
water.
No. You said, okay, so the next, you're just talking about the elements right now, not necessarily signs within the elements. Okay, so water is intuitive and instinctual.
Like fire is instinctual, water's intuitive and emotional and sensitive.
Got it.
And it needs something to contain it, right? And so fire and water, they need containers because if you think about the substance, something really physical there, right? And so water, more in terms of people, it's going to be more connected, relational in that it's emotional, and also creative. They're all creative, but creative in the sense that it needs to draw connections that are not, that might not be there in a rational way. So they don't go about doing things in the way that traditional structure requires.
So can you list the water signs?
The water signs are Scorpio, Cancer, and Pisces. The end, we said what the fire signs were. Okay. And so each of those are cardinal, fixed, and mutable. Okay. Then we have air. Air is masculine. Now we move into rational. Air is the mind. This describes how we're learning and making connections. So air is also incredibly social. And just think about that. Air takes the space of the room.
Yeah.
Right? Air is breath. And so it's how we're making connections but through our mind, not necessarily through our body or our emotions.
So this would be Gemini, Capricorn. No.
Gemini, and what else?
Aquarius.
Yep.
And
Your moon sign.
Libra.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's our air, Gemini, Aquarius, and Libra. And then we have Earth. And Earth is a feminine, rational sign. It's material, right? We just went through the manifestation. We started with the spirit of creation, which is fire, and we worked from the heavens down to Earth in the physical form. Earth signs are Virgo, Taurus, and Capricorn. And Earth describes the material. It describes security needs. It describes our senses. Earth experiences the world through the physical form. So it's going to be more concerned with work, with its body, with its money, anything that connects us to the physical world.
Got it.
Okay?
Great.
And so when we're looking at how the elements play together or interact relationally, as this is all about relationships, what should we know about the way that the elements
Interact
relate?
with each other.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to see when we break down the signs,
Okay.
because some of these, I mean, all the elements have to work together, and we are made up, of course, of all of the elements, but some work harmoniously and some work with lots of effort.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
One thing that we didn't talk about that I want to touch on really quick before we jump to the next episode here is we talked about sun and moon, your sun being Leo and my moon being Libra. But what if you have sun and moon in the same sign? What could that say about the person? Because we have a couple family members who are what is that called first, and then what does that mean?
Well, when the sun and moon are in the same sign, you're in a new moon, and when the sun and the moon are in opposition, you're in a full moon.
Okay.
And so those people were born during a new moon if it's in the same sign. And what it says is something similar to the concentration Virgo energy that you have. It's a concentration of energy. It means they can't get away from that.
Yeah.
That not only is their physical emanation here, going to be that sign, but it's also what drives them and what they need. So they're stuck in it. And I like to say, I mean, not that we're subscribing to past lives or anything, but I like to think that this is their first carnation, because it's a new moon and they're starting out a new moon. People typically are sort of naive. They're excited to get on with the world. It's not like the old souls that we talk about. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So now we have the basis.
Yep.
Yeah.
We were learning the language, and in our next episode, we'll begin to apply it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. This is a great stopping point. We covered a lot: sun, moon, rising. We covered planets. We talked about elements. We talked about seasons. We also defined our houses, and I think that covered it.
Yeah.
So pay attention to next week. Next Monday, we'll be releasing episode 2, where we will be breaking down the first 6 signs of the zodiac.
Yes.
With a general pros and cons, strengths, weaknesses. What does this look like when it's in balance? What does it look like when it's out of balance? What are some misunderstandings or underrated aspects of each one of these signs? So it's going to be juicy. We'll see you next week.
Yes.
All right.
Get your chart out.
Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed that, check out right over here for some more fun clips.
Oh, and you're going to want to subscribe.
Bye.